At the edge of known space, where trade routes thinned into silence and navigation buoys became sparse, humanity existed in a way that most galactic civilizations found easy to ignore. They were ordinary, not weak, no, never weak, but not remarkable in ways that mattered to empires. Their ships were functional, their weapons competent, their influence contained. They negotiated rather than dominated, adapted rather than conquered, and rarely projected power beyond their immediate interests. To the wider galaxy, humanity was categorized, filed, and mentally archived as stable. Stable meant predictable. Predictable meant safe to ignore. And so they were. But what the galaxy failed to recognize was that humanity had never been predictable. Not in their patterns. Not in their history. Not in the subtle ways they responded to pressure. Where other species specialized biologically or culturally, humans diversified. Where others optimized, humans experimented. Where others centralized authority for efficiency, humans fractured deliberately across governments, corporations, alliances, and independent networks. To outsiders, this appeared chaotic. To humans, it was resilience. And beneath that resilience lay something else entirely. A shared instinct that guided them long before they reached the stars. A quiet, collective memory of vulnerability. Across the galaxy, human presence was visible but understated. Their colonies were active yet unassuming. Their stations blended into commercial hubs. Their fleets patrolled within defined borders, rarely venturing into contested space unless provoked. Even their largest military installations were modest compared to those of established empires. On surface-level observation, humanity appeared to have accepted a secondary role in galactic affairs. Diplomats from other species often remarked on this with mixture curiosity and condescension. Humans know their place, some said. They understand balance, others noted. A few, more perceptive than the rest, disagreed, but lacked the evidence to challenge the prevailing narrative. Because humanity did something unusual. They revealed just enough. Enough to be seen. Enough to be measured. Enough to be underestimated. In one remote quadrant, a long-range survey vessel from the alien Dominion drifted quietly beyond the boundary of human-controlled space. Its mission was simple: observe trade flow, map resource routes, and update strategic models. Humanity was not its focus, but anomalies were, and anomalies had begun to appear. The vessel sensors registered irregular energy fluctuations near a cluster of systems officially designated as low value, uninhabited, unremarkable, and therefore unmonitored by most major powers. On paper, these systems contained nothing of interest, no inhabited worlds, no strategic resources, no known infrastructure, yet the readings suggested otherwise. Gravitational distortions pulsed faintly, too structured to be natural. Energy signatures rose and fell in patterns that did not match stellar activity. Interference and sensor arrays hinted at localized fields, carefully tuned, deliberately maintained. The alien crew debated briefly, then dismissed it. Sensor drift. One officer concluded, background interference. Another agreed. After all, humanity had never shown capacity for large-scale hidden engineering beyond standard megastructures or orbital platforms. Nothing suggested they could conceal anything beyond conventional expectations, and certainly not anything that could evade detection across entire systems. The vessel adjusted course and continued its patrol. No report was filed. No further analysis was requested. The anomaly was recorded and forgotten. Elsewhere, within human space, things continued as they always had. Ships moved along established lanes. Colonies expanded outward in carefully regulated increments. Industrial output increased steadily, but not explosively. Communication networks handled billions of interactions daily, without interruption. To any external observer, there was no indication of urgency. No visible military buildup. No unusual mobilization. No signs of preparation for conflict. And yet, beneath the surface of that apparent normalcy, something subtle persisted. Synchronization. Not centralized. Not commanded in the traditional sense, but aligned in ways that were difficult to quantify. Data packets traveled between systems through encrypted layers that even allied governments could not fully decode. Autonomous research facilities operated under overlapping jurisdictions. Industrial output from seemingly independent corporations converged toward shared technological milestones. Individually, each element appeared harmless. Collectively, they formed something far more complex. But because no single observer could see the entire network at once, no one realized what it truly represented. Humanity, in the eyes of the galaxy, remained what it had always been, a species among many, a participant, not a pillar, a presence, not a power. And that perception, so widely accepted, so rarely questioned, created the perfect environment for something unprecedented to grow unnoticed, not through secrecy alone, but through the quiet confidence of species that had learned long ago that survival was not guaranteed by visibility. It was guaranteed by preparation. And preparation, when done correctly, did not look like preparation at all. It looked like nothing, which was exactly how humanity intended it to appear. Beyond the well-mapped trade corridors and heavily monitored lanes of galactic commerce, there existed regions that most civilizations labeled as irrelevant, empty systems, dead zones, gravitational voids with no recorded settlements, no strategic resources, and no reason, on paper, for anyone to care. These were the places where attention faded, and where oversight failed. Within these quiet stretches of space, humanity had been steadily operating for decades under layers of deliberate obscurity. Not secrecy in the traditional sense, but invisibility by design. At first glance, a distant observer would see nothing unusual. A dim star system with a handful of barren planets orbiting at predictable intervals. No mining activity. No orbital stations. No visible fleets. Even advanced sensor sweeps would return minimal anomalies, slight energy fluctuations, faint electromagnetic noise, and the occasional gravitational irregularity easily attributed to natural cosmic variance. It would be easy to classify the system as unused, abandoned, irrelevant, and that assumption would be exactly what humanity relied upon. Hidden beneath the surface of one such empty system, a dead planet rotated slowly in orbit. Its exterior was scarred with impact craters, its atmosphere thin and unstable, its surface lifeless. To any passing survey vessel, it was unremarkable. But beneath that exterior, something immense was taking shape, not built in a single structure, not constructed in a single location, but assembled through layers of coordinated effort spanning multiple systems, connected through encrypted channels and autonomous coordination protocols that operated beyond conventional oversight. Drones moved silently beneath the crust, tunneling through layers of rock and metal with precision that bordered on surgical. Internal cavities expanded gradually, reinforced by materials engineered to withstand stresses far beyond natural planetary limits. What appeared to be geological formations on the outside were, in reality, structural frameworks, support lattices designed to redistribute mass and stabilize artificial modifications. The planet itself was being transformed, not into a habitat, but into something far more complex. In another system, far removed from the first, a similar process was underway. A gas giant, catalogued as uninhabitable, showed no outward signs of activity. Its storms raged as they always had. Its magnetic field fluctuated within expected parameters. Its vast rings and moons remained unchanged. Yet within its upper atmospheric layers, invisible constructs extended outward, massive anchoring fields that penetrated deep into the planet's gravitational layers. Within those fields, industrial nodes operated continuously, harvesting raw material directly from the planetary environment and refining it into components that would later be transported elsewhere. Nothing about the process was centralized in a way that could be easily tracked. Each node functioned independently. Each output was routed through a network of intermediary systems. No single point contained enough information to reveal the full scope of what was happening, and that fragmentation was intentional across dozens of systems. Similar operations unfolded simultaneously. Artificial structures masqueraded as natural satellites. Relocated asteroids served as concealed manufacturing platforms. Inactive research stations, officially decommissioned, continue to operate under automated control, producing specialized components that would never be linked together by outside analysis. To an external intelligence agency attempting to map human infrastructure, the result would appear disjointed, fragmented, unrelated, no discernible pattern, no centralized hub, no clear indication that these scattered activities were part of a unified objective. And yet, beneath that apparent chaos, synchronization persisted, not through visible coordination, but through timing, precise, calculated timing. Events across distant systems would align within margins too tight to be coincidental, suggesting a level of distributed control that did not rely on traditional command structures. The true scale of human operations remained hidden not because it was actively concealed at every moment, but because it was structured in a way that prevented full visibility from any single vantage point. No observer, no matter how advanced, could access the entire picture. Each system revealed only its own fragment. Each fragment appeared insignificant on its own, and insignificance, when repeated across enough locations, became indistinguishable from background noise. In the quiet of deep space, a human-operated probe drifted past a region that contained one of these concealed systems. Its sensors briefly passed over the gravitational profile of a dead planet. For a fraction of a second, the probe registered something unusual, a subtle shift, a resonance that did not match any known natural formation. The anomaly lasted less than a heartbeat, then vanished. The probe's onboard systems categorized the reading as interference and logged it as a minor deviation. No alert was triggered. No report was escalated. The moment passed unnoticed. But within the system itself, something reacted, not visibly, not immediately, but internally, within the hidden frameworks embedded deep beneath the planet's surface. A network node adjusted its output. A data stream rerouted. A synchronization pulse recalibrated across adjacent systems. Not a response to threat, not a defensive measure, but a correction, a refinement, as if the system had briefly acknowledged that it had been observed and quietly ensured that it would not be understood. To the galaxy, these regions remained empty. To humanity, they were anything but. As operations continued across countless systems in silence, the distinction between what was seen and what was real began to widen, unnoticed, unchallenged, until the moment someone finally looked too closely and realized too late that the shadows they had ignored were never empty at all. Across the known galaxy, power was something that could be measured, compared, and, most importantly, displayed. Massive fleets gliding in perfect formation, armadas that stretched across star systems like metallic storms, dreadnoughts whose weapon signatures outshined suns for brief, terrifying moments. Civilizations rose and fell based on how convincingly they could project strength. And in that grand hierarchy of visible dominance, humanity appeared modest. On the surface, galactic analysts had already categorized humanity into a comfortable framework. Not primitive, not advanced enough to be dominant. A mid-tier civilization with stable governance, growing technological capability, and a tendency toward cooperation rather than conquest. Their industrial output was respectable. Their engineering achievements were acknowledged. Their adaptability was noted, but none of it elevated them beyond a certain threshold in strategic evaluations. Humanity, in the eyes of most empires, lacked the scale required to pose a significant threat. And that belief, repeated across countless reports, briefings, and intelligence summaries, became accepted truth. In the halls of the Orion Concordat, senior strategists reviewed the latest interspecies threat assessments. Holo-displays projected sector maps filled with colored zones indicating influence, military presence, and contested regions. Human space appeared as a small, contained cluster near the periphery. Stable borders, minimal expansion pressure, no aggressive territorial claims, no significant military engagements with neighboring powers. One analyst gestured toward the human sector. They don't behave like expansionists, she said. Their growth is organic, not force. Another nodded. They lack the aggressive doctrine we see in more dominant species. A third added, almost dismissively, they've chosen specialization in resilience rather than projection. The conclusion was unanimous. Humans were not a priority. Elsewhere, within the Varelian Dominion, military doctrine emphasized preemptive control of emerging threats. Their philosophy was simple: identify potential adversaries early and ensure they never reach a level where confrontation becomes costly. Humanity had been evaluated under this doctrine multiple times. Each time, the result was the same: monitor but do not engage. The reasoning was consistent. Humanity did not expand aggressively into neighboring systems. They did not interfere with established borders. They did not challenge Dominion patrols or probe restricted zones. In short, they exhibited none of the behaviors associated with imminent strategic threats. To the Varelians, this was not weakness. It was irrelevance. Even among more cautious species, those that had survived previous galactic conflicts, humanity failed to trigger alarm thresholds. Their technological progress, while steady, did not exhibit the explosive leaps typically associated with civilizations on the brink of military escalation. No sudden fleet expansions, no mass mobilization events, no large-scale weapon deployments detected across their core systems. From an external perspective, humanity appeared balanced, predictable, contained. What no one accounted for was the difference between what a civilization showed and what it chose not to show. Galactic intelligence agencies relied heavily on observable data, fleet movements, energy signatures, trade patterns, communication intercepts. These indicators formed the backbone of threat assessment models. But those models had one fundamental assumption: that significant power would inevitably leave traces, visible traces, detectable traces. And for most civilizations, that assumption held true, because most civilizations built power in ways that required visibility. Humanity did not. Within classified briefing rooms, a small number of analysts occasionally raised concerns about inconsistencies in human data. Not enough to form a threat, but enough to suggest irregularities. One report noted discrepancies between recorded industrial capacity and observed output. Another highlighted unusually efficient logistics across widely separated human systems. A third pointed out that human internal coordination, despite apparent political fragmentation, seemed unusually aligned during large-scale global events. These observations were filed, reviewed, then ultimately dismissed. The prevailing interpretation was simple. Humanity was efficient, not secretive, not concealed, just optimized. And so the broader galaxy continued to operate under a shared, unspoken assumption: if humanity possessed something significant, something dangerous, it would be visible by now. Because in a galaxy where power had always announced itself loudly, silence was interpreted as absence. That assumption became the foundation of countless strategic decisions: resource allocations, border negotiations, fleet deployments, alliance formations. Humanity was factored into models, but never as a central variable, never as a destabilizing force, never as something that could alter the balance of power in a meaningful way. far beyond the council chambers and military command centers. In the quiet of deep space, human systems continued their hidden operations. No alarms were triggered by the galaxy's oversight. No countermeasures were activated. No attempts were made to investigate beyond superficial scans, because there was no perceived need. And that, more than anything, was humanity's greatest advantage. Not superior weapons, not overwhelming numbers, but the collective certainty of an entire galaxy that had already decided what humanity was without ever truly testing the limits of what they could become. In war, misjudging an opponent could lead to defeat. But in this case, the misjudgment was far deeper. The galaxy had not merely underestimated humanity. It had defined them incorrectly from the very beginning. And once a belief became embedded across so many civilizations, so many systems, and so many decision-making processes, it became difficult to challenge, even when evidence began to suggest otherwise, because accepting the truth would require admitting a flaw in judgment. And in a galaxy built on dominance and reputation, few were willing to question their own certainty. That certainty remained unshaken, unchallenged, unquestioned, right up until the moment something impossible forced them to reconsider everything they thought they knew about the quiet species they had so easily ignored. It began the way most overlooked threats began in the galaxy, quietly, without warning, without recognition, in the outer fringe of monitored space, where survey routes thinned and automated patrols operated on delayed cycles. A routine scan returned an irregular reading. At first, it was insignificant. A minor fluctuation in gravitational mapping. A deviation, so small it fell within acceptable margins of error for long-range instruments operating near stellar interference. The system flagged it as noise, filtered it, ignored it, but the anomaly did not disappear. It shifted. Within the same region, a second sensor, positioned on a different vector and calibrated to a different spectrum, registered a similar disturbance. Not identical, but correlated. A pattern began to emerge, though no single system connected the dots. Gravitational pulses, energy signatures that rose and fell in structured intervals, localized distortions that seemed to form boundaries, invisible ones. On board an Alien Dominion reconnaissance vessel, the bridge remained calm as data streams updated across multiple displays. The vessel's captain, a seasoned officer accustomed to anomalies, reviewed the incoming readings with mild curiosity rather than concern. Cross-referenced the scans, he ordered. Already running, replied the system's analyst. Seconds passed, then minutes. The results aligned, not perfectly, but close enough to warrant attention. The readings were consistent across multiple instruments, multiple passes, and multiple angles of observation. This was no longer random noise. A subtle shift occurred in the tone of the bridge. Not alarm, not panic, but hesitation. The analyst leaned forward slightly, eyes narrowing as additional layers of data were projected. "There's structure here," she said quietly. "Explain," the captain replied. "It's not natural," she continued. "The gravitational variance. Look at the repetition intervals. They're too consistent. Natural bodies don't produce repeating signatures like this at this scale." The captain stepped closer to the display. The anomaly was faint, but visible when isolated. A repeating oscillation embedded within the fabric of space-time itself. Not chaotic, not random, structured, intentional. "Could be a hidden mass," one officer suggested. "Perhaps a cluster of dense objects or an undiscovered celestial formation." The analyst shook her head. If it were mass alone, the readings would be stable. This fluctuates. It's as if something is modulating the field. Silence followed. The captain studied the data longer this time, then issued a directive. Deploy a probe. A small reconnaissance probe detached from the vessel, its propulsion systems engaging silently as it adjusted trajectory toward the anomaly's origin point. Its path was calculated, precise, and cautious. From a distance, the region appeared empty, a void between map systems, a space that had been passed over countless times without incident. But now, Under closer scrutiny, it began to feel occupied. As the probe approached, its sensors intensified. Initial readings confirmed what the vessel had observed. Gravitational distortions persisted. Energy fluctuations continued. But something else emerged as well. Interference. Subtle at first, then increasingly pronounced. The probe's instruments began to struggle to maintain calibration, not due to malfunction, but due to external influence. Signal degradation increasing, the probe operator reported. Compensate, the captain ordered. Attempting, came the response. The probe entered the outer boundary of the anomaly. At that moment, its sensor suite recorded a sharp spike, a momentary distortion that didn't match any known natural phenomenon. Then, a gap, a blind spot, data loss, the operator said. Repeat that, the captain asked. Partial sensor blackout. Something is interfering with the probe systems. On the main display, the probe's telemetry flickered, then stabilized, then flickered again. Inside the anomaly, the probe drifted forward, its cameras adjusted, its arrays recalibrated, and for a brief instant, it captured something. Not clearly, not fully, but enough to register an irregularity in the environment that should not exist. A faint outline, a curvature in space that did not align with expected planetary or stellar formations. Something vast, something structured, something artificial. The image transmitted back to the vessel lasted less than a second before the signal degraded completely, then vanished. Probe lost? One officer asked. No, the operator replied slowly, watching the telemetry collapse into static. Not lost. A pause, then a correction. Blocked. The captain's expression changed. Subtle, but unmistakable. Because in all his years of service, across countless missions and countless anomalies, he had never encountered a situation where a probe didn't fail, but was instead cut off, deliberately, marked a region, he said finally, full classification, unknown anomaly. He hesitated for a fraction of a second longer than protocol required, then added, priority observation. As the vessel began to withdraw to a safer observational distance, the analyst glanced once more at the fading data traces. The patterns were still there, hidden within the noise, consistent, repeating, waiting, and somewhere within that same region, beyond the reach of conventional detection, something had already noticed the probe's presence, not with sensors that could be easily explained, but with awareness that operated on a different level entirely. Because the moment observation crossed a certain threshold, the anomaly was no longer just being observed. It was responding, quietly, precisely, and without revealing anything more than it chose to allow. The galaxy had always believed in gradual revelations. Technologies evolved step by step. Civilizations expanded system by system. Power revealed itself through visible accumulation. Fleet by fleet, station by station, conquest by conquest. Nothing in recorded history had ever appeared all at once. Not like this. It began with a single, seemingly ordinary absence. At the Orion Concordat Central Summit, human representatives had been present as expected, participating in discussions, observing negotiations, contributing only when necessary. Their demeanor was consistent with long-standing diplomatic behavior, measured, restrained, and unobtrusive. Then, without ceremony, the human delegate excused themselves. No announcement, no disruption, no indication of urgency. They simply stood, exchanged brief acknowledgments with nearby delegates, and exited the chamber. Other species barely noticed. Meetings resumed. Agendas continued. Conversations flowed uninterrupted. To everyone in the room, it was a minor logistical departure. Nothing more. But within moments of that quiet exit, something began to change. Not in the summit, not in a single location, but across the galaxy. In systems long designated as unremarkable, dead zones, empty sectors, regions dismissed as lacking strategic value, subtle indicators began to activate simultaneously. At first, These activations were too small to be noticed individually. A faint energy signature rising from a planet previously cataloged as inert, a gravitational shift near an asteroid field that had never been flagged for interest, a dormant satellite emitting a low-frequency pulse that did not match any natural phenomenon. Each event, on its own, could have been explained away. Each could have been dismissed as anomaly, interference, or sensor drift. But the timing was impossible to ignore. Across multiple systems, separated by vast distances that should have prevented any form of direct coordination, these activations occurred within tightly aligned windows, seconds apart, not minutes, not hours, seconds. On a Varelian monitoring station, an alert finally triggered, not because of a single event, but because of a correlation threshold being exceeded across multiple independent sensor arrays. The station's analysts rushed to their consoles as overlapping data streams began to converge into a pattern too consistent to be accidental. "What is this?" one of them demanded. The display updated, then updated again, and again. Each refresh revealed more simultaneous anomalies, more coordinated activations, more systems behaving in ways that defied their recorded classifications. "Cross-reference all human control sectors," the lead analyst ordered. Within moments, the system returned a projection. The results were incomplete, not because data was missing, but because the scale of simultaneous activity exceeded the system's ability to render it cohesively in a single model. The visualization fragmented, then attempted to rebuild, then fragmented again. "What are we looking at?" a junior officer asked, voice tightening. The lead analyst didn't answer immediately, because the implications were already forming, and they were difficult to accept. This was not a localized event, not a regional anomaly, not even a coordinated system-wide maneuver. This was something broader, something distributed, something that had been prepared in advance across multiple independent locations, all now activating in unison. Meanwhile, at the Galactic Summit, subtle changes began to ripple through the chamber. Communications channels experienced brief, unexplained latency spikes. External feeds flickered. Sensor reports from peripheral monitoring stations began to arrive in rapid succession. Delegates received updates, then more updates, then overlapping alerts that contradicted earlier assumptions about human inactivity in remote sectors. A quiet tension began to spread. Not panic, not yet, but something close to it. The first visual confirmation came from a deep space observatory positioned near the boundary of human space. Its long-range optics, designed to capture high-resolution imagery of distant celestial bodies, focused on a system previously cataloged as empty. At first glance, the system appeared unchanged. Planets in stable orbit, no visible infrastructure, no fleet presence, nothing to indicate any deviation from its recorded state. Then the observatory adjusted its filters. Layer by layer, it stripped away background interference. Stellar light was filtered, infrared signatures isolated, gravitational lensing corrected, and as the final layer of noise was removed, the image changed. What had appeared to be a barren planet began to reveal subtle structural irregularities, geometric alignments beneath the surface, energy emissions that followed non-random distributions, mass distributions that did not conform to natural planetary composition. The observatory operator leaned closer to the display. "Enhance that region," she said. The system complied. Magnification increased. Resolution sharpened. Details became clearer. And then, a boundary became visible. Not a physical wall in the conventional sense, but a delineation in energy and structure that separated the outer appearance of the planet from something deeper within. Something layered. Something engineered. The operator paused, then spoke slowly. "That's not a planet." The sentence trailed off as the implication settled, because what she was seeing did not match any known classification of natural celestial bodies. It resembled something else entirely, something constructed, something deliberately shaped. At the exact same moment, across multiple systems, similar observations were being made. Different observers, different instruments, different regions of space. But identical conclusions were forming independently. Humanity had not increased its visible fleet presence. It had not launched a surprise offensive. It had not revealed new weapons in the traditional sense. Instead, entire worlds were beginning to disclose their true nature, slowly, simultaneously, and without prior warning to those who had believed themselves prepared for anything. Back at the summit, the human delegate's absence was no longer viewed as a simple departure. It was reinterpreted, recontextualized, re-examined under the weight of emerging evidence. Because for the first time since humanity had entered the galactic stage, the galaxy was no longer observing humans from a position of assumed understanding. It was realizing that humanity had been operating on a scale it had never thought to measure, and now that scale was no longer hidden. It was revealing itself, all at once, across the stars. Shock in the galaxy rarely came from strength. It came from realization. The moment a civilization understood that its assumptions had been incomplete, that its models had been flawed, that its confidence had been built on partial truths, that was when shock took hold. And across countless systems, that moment had just arrived. At first, denial was the instinctive reaction. Reports flooded in from observatories, reconnaissance vessels, and monitoring stations. Each source confirmed the same impossible conclusion. Multiple human-associated systems were exhibiting synchronized activations of massive structures previously classified as natural celestial bodies. But confirmation did not immediately translate into acceptance. Analysts questioned calibration errors. Engineers suggested sensor drift. Commanders requested repeat scans. Some even proposed external interference affecting multiple independent networks simultaneously, because the alternative was too large to process quickly. In the Varelian Dominion command hierarchy, emergency protocols began to activate, not due to a direct threat, but due to uncertainty. And uncertainty, in their doctrine, was treated as a precursor to risk. Strategic alerts were raised across multiple fleet sectors. Patrol formations were reoriented. Long-range tracking arrays were brought online at full sensitivity. For the first time in decades, human space was being monitored with priority status. Confirm human asset mobilization? A senior commander demanded. Data suggests simultaneous activation events across at least 47 systems. An analyst replied, voice control but tense. Fleet signatures? None detected in conventional terms. A pause. Explain. The analyst hesitated, then brought up the updated projection. It's not fleets, she said. The display rendered a fragmented model of the observations. Each planet appears to be structurally modified. Internal readings indicate mass distribution inconsistent with natural formation. Energy emission suggests internal systems operating at planetary scale. The commander leaned forward. Planetary scale what? The analyst didn't complete the sentence, because there was no established classification that fit the data cleanly. Elsewhere, within the Orion Concordat, diplomatic channels were suddenly overwhelmed with requests for clarification. Delegates from multiple species demanded explanations from human representatives. Not accusations. Not yet. But urgency was beginning to replace curiosity. What are these structures? One envoy asked during an emergency session. Why were they not disclosed? Are they military installations? Are they active? The human representative present in the chamber remained composed, silent for a moment, observing, then speaking only when directly addressed. Our systems have always been under observation, they replied calmly, just not in the way you assumed. The response did not satisfy the room. If anything, it intensified the unease, because it suggested awareness, intent, preparation. Across military networks, response scenarios began to be drafted. Not all species agreed on immediate action. Some advocated for cautious observation. Others pushed for rapid preemptive measures. A few argued for diplomatic engagement before assumptions escalated into conflict, but all of them shared one underlying concern. They did not fully understand what they were dealing with. Fleet commanders began repositioning assets, not aggressively, but defensively. Formations tightened. Patrol routes shifted. Forward reconnaissance units were dispatched to gather more precise data on human control regions. For the first time in recent memory, humanity had become the focus of coordinated attention across multiple powers. Yet even as fleets mobilized, something unusual became apparent. The human structures did not respond in kind. No fleets advanced to intercept. No defensive formations were deployed outward in visible space. No signals were broadcast announcing hostility or intent to engage. Instead, the planet-sized structures remained in place, stable, active, and observant. On a tactical grid, analysts attempted to model potential engagement outcomes. Simulations ran through thousands of scenarios. Each one assumed traditional engagement patterns: fleet-to-fleet combat, orbital bombardment, interception maneuvers. But every model encountered the same limitation. There was no comparable reference point. The scale of the human structures defied conventional combat modeling. They were not ships in the traditional sense. They were environments, systems, entities of mass and engineering that operated beyond the scope of standard naval warfare doctrine. Range estimates are unreliable, one strategist noted. Targeting solutions are incomplete, another added. Even if we engage, we don't have verified damage models for structures of this magnitude. Silence followed that statement, because it implied a difficult truth. They were preparing for a confrontation they did not fully understand. Meanwhile, at the edge of one human control system, a reconnaissance fleet from an external empire cautiously approached a distant planetary body that had recently revealed anomalous signatures. Their sensors were active at maximum sensitivity. Their weapon systems were armed, but not yet deployed. The atmosphere aboard the fleet was tense, not hostile, but alert. Maintain distance, the fleet commander ordered. We're here to observe, not provoke. The lead vessel adjusted its trajectory slightly, maintaining a wide berth while scanning the target. At first glance, the planet appeared unchanged, but as the fleet's instruments refined their readings, subtle confirmations began to accumulate. Internal energy flows, non-random structural layering, controlled emissions beneath the surface. Then, unexpectedly, a synchronized pulse, not directed at the fleet, not targeted, but unmistakably detectable. A signal emanating from within the planetary structure itself. The fleet's sensors captured it instantly. Signal detected. The operator reported. Origin: internal, planetary core region. Content: the data was processed, decoded, then displayed. It was not a warning, not a threat, not a declaration of hostility. It was acknowledgement. The commander stared at the readout for a long moment, because the implication was immediate and unavoidable. They had been detected, not by accident, not through passive observation, but through awareness that existed at a level they had not anticipated, and across multiple systems. Similar moments were occurring simultaneously. Different fleets, different species, different vantage points, but all arriving at the same realization at nearly the same time. Humanity had not simply revealed its hidden assets. It had revealed that it had been aware of being watched long before the galaxy ever realized it was being observed in return. The galaxy had expected a declaration of dominance, a demand, an ultimatum, a demonstration of power meant to intimidate, to conquer, or to force compliance. That was how civilizations revealed themselves when their hidden strength was finally exposed. But humanity did not follow that script. Across secure channels, an open broadcast began to propagate, not encrypted, not restricted, not limited to any single species or alliance. It was transmitted broadly, reaching observatories, fleet command centers, diplomatic stations, and civilian monitoring networks alike. At first, analysts suspected a trap, a misdirection, a prelude to something larger. But the signal remained stable, consistent, unaltered. The visual feed stabilized into a neutral backdrop, a human interface, minimalistic in design, devoid of embellishment or intimidation. No displays of force, no imagery of fleets or weaponry, just a representative standing in a controlled environment, illuminated by soft, even lighting. Their posture is calm, their expression measured. This message is not a warning. The human representative began. The tone was steady, neither aggressive nor conciliatory, nor is it a demand. A pause. As of this moment, humanity has chosen to make its position clear. Across the galaxy, observers leaned in closer to their displays, not because of volume, but because of implication. The representative continued. For a long period of time, humanity has observed the patterns of galactic civilizations. We have studied cycles of expansion, conflict, consolidation, and collapse. Another pause. From those observations, a consistent truth emerged. Within command centers and diplomatic halls, attention intensified because what followed was not phrased as rhetoric. It was delivered as a conclusion. Civilizations that reveal their full capabilities too early become targets. The statement was simple, unadorned, and widely understood. We chose not to follow that pattern. On multiple screens across the galaxy, analysts cross-referenced the statement with known human history. It aligned. Too well. Human expansion had been steady but cautious. Their technological advancements had been consistent but not overtly escalatory. Their military presence had remained contained within defined boundaries. Now, those behaviors were being reinterpreted, not as limitations, but as deliberate restraint. The representative continued. Humanity has developed capabilities that were not disclosed publicly. These were not hidden out of deception, but out of necessity. A slight shift in tone. Visibility invites scrutiny. Scrutiny invites conflict. Fleet commanders reviewed the broadcast alongside their tactical assessments. The tone of the message was not hostile, but it was firm, controlled, intentional. The structures now observed across human control systems are not offensive deployments, the representative said. They are safeguards. The word lingered. Safeguards, not weapons, not invasions, not tools of expansion. Humanity has never sought to expand beyond its means, the message continued. Our objective has always been continuity. In strategic rooms across the galaxy, interpretations varied. Some species saw the message as reassurance. Others viewed it as subtle warning. A few recognized it as something more nuanced, a boundary. The representative's gaze remained steady. Humanity prefers coexistence. We engage in trade, diplomacy, and mutual development. A brief pause. But we do not rely on the assumption that all civilizations will share those preferences indefinitely. The implication was clear. Humanity had prepared for scenarios others had not because they expected hostility from everyone, but because they could not afford to assume it would never come from anyone. Therefore, the representative concluded, our capabilities exist to ensure that no external force can compromise our survival. There was no escalation in tone, no dramatic emphasis, no theatrical delivery, just clarity. On the tactical level, analysts attempted to reconcile this declaration with observed data. Planet-sized structures capable of sustained energy output at scales previously unimaginable. Distributed systems operating in synchronization across multiple systems. Infrastructure that could not be easily targeted, isolated, or neutralized using conventional methods. It's a deterrent doctrine, one strategist said quietly. But unlike traditional deterrence, another added, it's not centralized, it's embedded. The distinction mattered, because traditional deterrence relied on visible assets, fleets, bases, installations that could be measured and compared. Human deterrence appeared to be woven into the fabric of multiple systems simultaneously, not concentrated, not dependent on a single point of failure. Back on the broadcast, the representative delivered the final portion of the message. We have no interest in conflict. A pause. But we are no longer operating from a position of vulnerability. No threats were issued. No demands were made. No declarations of superiority were presented. Instead, humanity had established something far more significant. A defined position, a stated capability, and an implicit boundary. Across the galaxy, reactions varied. Some civilizations began revising their strategic models immediately. Others called emergency sessions to reassess their stance toward human space. Diplomatic channels experienced a surge in communication, requests directed toward human representatives. Fleet formations adjusted once more, not toward engagement, but toward caution, because the message had not escalated tensions. It had resolved a critical uncertainty. Humanity was not hiding. Humanity was not unaware. Humanity had been observing the observers, while ensuring that its survival did not depend on being noticed. And now that the veil had lifted, the galaxy was forced to accept a new understanding. Humanity had never been a passive participant in galactic affairs. It had been preparing, quietly, patiently, and with enough foresight to ensure that when it finally chose to be seen, it would not be defined by others' assumptions. It would be defined by its own terms. Silence, in the aftermath of revelation, is never empty. It is measured. It is cautious. It is the space where civilizations decide whether the next moment will be defined by understanding or by irreversible action. Across the galaxy, that silence now stretched between species that had, only moments before, believed they understood their place in the hierarchy of power. Humanity's broadcast had ended. No follow-up messages were issued. No additional signals confirmed escalation. The planet-sized structures remained active, but unmoving in any aggressive sense, positioned within their systems as if they had always belonged there, waiting not to strike, but to exist. Stable, silent, complete. In the Orion Concordat, emergency deliberations continued long after the transmission had ceased. Delegates from multiple species debated not whether humanity was a threat, but how to reinterpret humanity's existence within established frameworks of galactic order. We have been operating under incomplete data, one senior delegate admitted. Not incomplete, another corrected carefully. Misinterpreted. That distinction carried weight, because it meant the error was not in the data itself, but in the assumptions used to evaluate it. In military command centers, strategic models were revised in real time. Human space was no longer treated as a peripheral region. It was reclassified, not as hostile, not as allied, but as independent at a scale previously unaccounted for. Fleet movements were adjusted accordingly, not withdrawn, not advanced, but reoriented, because confrontation was no longer a viable default consideration. For many civilizations, this required a fundamental shift in thinking. Power had always been understood through visibility, the number of ships, the size of fleets, the reach of territorial influence. But humanity had introduced a different model, power that was distributed, infrastructure that was concealed within natural-looking bodies, and coordination that did not rely on centralized, easily targeted nodes. In practical terms, this meant that engaging humanity through conventional means was no longer straightforward. Targeting a fleet was one thing. Targeting a world that was a fleet, or could become one, was something else entirely. Trade networks began to react first. Commercial routes that passed near human systems saw a surge in precautionary rerouting. Insurance costs for interstellar transport fluctuated. Merchant guilds issued advisories recommending heightened caution, not due to hostility, but due to uncertainty, because uncertainty, in trade as much as in war, carries risk. Diplomatic efforts increased almost immediately. Requests for formal dialogues with human representatives multiplied across multiple channels. Not demands, not ultimatums. Requests. Civilizations that had previously treated humanity as a secondary participant now approached with a different tone entirely. Measured, respectful, aware, and within human-controlled space, operations continued as they always had. No sudden expansions, no aggressive border pushes, no visible shifts in policy that would indicate a change in long-term intent. From the human perspective, nothing fundamental had altered. Their preparations remained what they had always been, a safeguard against worst-case scenarios. But from the perspective of the galaxy, everything had changed. At the edge of one human system, a previously unremarkable planet now bore the subtle signs of its true nature being recognized. External observers maintained distance, not because they had been warned, but because they understood instinctively that proximity no longer implied neutrality. It implied awareness, and awareness required caution. Inside that system, no human fleets moved to intercept. No defensive formations expanded outward. No signals demanded withdrawal. Instead, the structures remained in equilibrium, maintaining their internal processes without external projection of force. They did not need to demonstrate capability. That demonstration had already occurred. In time, Patterns began to emerge in how the galaxy interacted with humanity. Direct confrontation was avoided, not out of fear alone, but out of practicality. Engagement required understanding, and understanding required observation. Species that once dismissed humanity began sending envoys, not to challenge, but to learn, not to test strength, but to establish communication under terms that acknowledged a new reality. And humanity, in turn, responded in kind, not with expansion, not with domination, but with controlled openness, selective transparency, measured interaction. The galaxy began to stabilize, not because power had been equalized, but because the assumptions underpinning conflict had been disrupted. No civilization could now approach human space with certainty of outcome. And in a universe where uncertainty often led to escalation, that alone was enough to alter behavior. Over time, a new equilibrium formed, not an alliance in the traditional sense, not a unified governing structure, but a balance, a recognition, a quiet understanding shared across species that humanity existed outside the previously accepted tiers of galactic classification. They were not invaders, not conquerors, not passive observers. They were something else. A civilization that had chosen to prepare so thoroughly that it would never again be placed in a position where its survival depended on being underestimated. And in that choice, humanity had reshaped more than just its own destiny. It had reshaped the expectations of an entire galaxy. The lesson, though unspoken, became clear over time. Power does not always announce itself through conquest. Sometimes, it reveals itself in restraint, in preparation, in the quiet certainty that when the moment comes, it will not be caught unprepared. And so the galaxy adjusted, not through fear, not through submission, but through understanding that one of its quietest civilizations had, all along, been one of its most prepared, and that realization would echo for generations,